Welcome to A Theory of Community of Inquiry. This is a brief overview and introduction based on Chapter 7 by Randy Garrison and Walter Archer from the Handbook of Distance Education, summarized by Fred Hyatt for IPNT 520. In this presentation, we're going to first define the model or framework that the authors have presented relative to a community of inquiry. Then we will look at some pedagogical implications, and finally we'll consider some organizational issues that challenge the implementation of this model or framework. It's important first to understand that the community of inquiry includes three primary elements, and the confluence of these elements makes up the educational experience. First of all, we have the social presence, the first element. Second, the cognitive presence. And third, the teaching presence, or structure and process involved in the teaching experience. As you can see, the social presence includes both the supporting discourse as well as the setting climate. The cognitive presence includes not only the supporting discourse, but also selecting of the content, which in turn is included, along with setting the climate, in the teaching presence. Let's go on now and look more specifically at the definition of a community of inquiry. As we said, this is made up of three primary elements. The social presence. This is the ability of learners to project themselves, that is, their personal characteristics, both socially and emotionally. Taking this to an extreme, this is how the learner chooses to involve himself in the learning process. The learner can choose to involve himself at whatever time and to whatever extent he chooses. He is not constrained by the moment of being involved directly in a face-to-face learning situation. To illustrate this, I will now reveal my complete presence at this moment from a bunker in my basement where this presentation is initially being recorded, as opposed to the presence I was presenting earlier in this presentation. Hopefully this will not distract, but this will help you remember this aspect and element of the model. Moving on to the second aspect, we have the cognitive presence. This is the extent to which the learners construct and confirm meaning, primarily through reflection and discourse. The authors rely heavily upon the work of Dewey and his four phases of the cognitive process: triggering event, exploration, integration, and resolution. You can see that these principles are very much along. Lastly, we move to the third element, the teaching presence. This includes the design, facilitation, and direction of the earlier two elements for the purpose of realizing the learning outcomes. Now, putting this all together, we move on to the complete picture as how this model is applied. You can see in the center we have the different phases that Dewey explained: triggering event, exploration, integration, and resolution. The experience revolves around these and involves different aspects of the learning processes, moving from the shared world to the private world, including reflection and discourse. This really represents the full model of a community of inquiry. Having defined the model now, let's move on to the pedagogical implications. First, we have the challenge of understanding the use of online learning in order to achieve higher order learning objectives. This involves critical thinking and especially developing learners, or the ability within learners to learn to learn. This is very fundamental to Garrison's philosophy. Next, we have the requirement for a stronger teaching presence during online learning. The focus on the phase of critical thinking, progressing from one phase to the other, and helping the learner to gain a metacognitive understanding of the entire process. From these implications, the authors establish some guiding principles. First of all, it's necessary to establish a climate that will create a community of inquiry. Next, it's important to establish critical reflection and discourse that will support systematic inquiry. Third, it's important to sustain the community through expression of group cohesion. Fourth, encourage and support progression of inquiry through resolution. This follows Dewey's phases. Fifth, evolve collaborative relationships where students are supported in assuming increasing responsibility for their learning. This goes along with the challenge of helping learners learn to learn. And last, ensure that there's a resolution and metacognitive development on the part of the learners. Finally, let's take a look at the organizational issues related to implementing this community of inquiry framework. The authors quote Clayton Christensen describing online education as a disruptive technology. As such, this new technology requires the organization to do things in a fundamentally different way. It's necessary to incubate the disruptive technology of online learning in areas of the organization where they are needed and valued. This facilitates the adoption and acceptance of the new technology. The authors suggest that blended learning is a very promising stepping stone to accomplish and overcome these organizational issues. First, online learning should be contextualized in a more convenient campus-based context. And second, this requires reflection, discussion, and rethinking the methods and the paradigms of the past. By way of conclusion, let's review briefly. And by the way, I have now adjusted my social presence to be more appropriate to an ideal educational experience. The three elements of the community of inquiry framework include social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. These combine and overlap to build the educational experience overall. Applying this framework now, we see that it involves the triggering event, exploration, integration, and resolution, the four phases that Dewey described. The learner is involved in discourse in the shared world in a collaborative sense, but also in the private world is involved in reflection as the learner continues and cycles through this learning experiential process. Hopefully, this has been a useful introduction to the theory of community of inquiry. Thank you.